Why is it that when the villain walks on screen, half the audience instantly goes, okay, but hear me out? Why do we cheer when Madara solos an entire army? Why did so many players walk away from Borderlands 2 thinking Handsome Jack was kind of right? And why, despite everything, do people still defend Griffith? I mean, Griffith. Today we're diving into what I like to call the villain charm, that mysterious gravitational pull that makes us root for, relate to, or even fall in love with the villain of a story. This is the psychology, the writing craft, and the phenomenon of the beloved antagonist. Let's get into it. There's a simple truth we all instinctively understand. Villain gets to do what protagonists can't. Heroes follow moral codes, responsibilities, expectation, paperwork probably. But villains? They are unrestricted human potential. The embodiment of, what if I didn't have to care what people think? That's part of the charm. Even kids get this. When you're young and you first see a character like Freezer, Dio, or Azula, it's striking. They radiate confidence, control, authority. They walk into a room and the entire world seems to react to them. Villains represent power without apology, something we're trained to suppress in daily life. And seeing someone act without fear of consequence, even if they're fictional, taps into that forbidden part of us that wants to break the rules. We don't want to be them, but we're fascinated by the freedom they represent. Of course, power alone doesn't make a villain lovable. If that were the case, every big evil dragon with 1,000 hit points would be found on poster material. What actually hooks us is tragedy. Many iconic villains are not born evil. They're shaped by loss, betrayal, or disillusionment. Their stories are cautionary tales of what happens when hope rots. Take Pain from Naruto. His ideology is twisted, but his worldview, his trauma, we get it. His villainy isn't random. It's a final stage of a long, brutal character arc. Or think about Arthas in Warcraft, one of the cleanest tragic descents in gaming history. You see him change slowly, step by step, tragic but inevitable, until suddenly you're no longer watching a hero at all. Sympathize because tragedy makes this character recognizable. In them we see fears we all share. Fear of loss, fear of insignificance, fear of being powerless. A well-written tragic villain feels like a version of ourselves that broke instead of healed. That's both terrifying and deeply compelling at the same time. Some villains win us over because they're just entertaining. You can disagree with Hisoka on, well, every moral level possible, but you can't deny he's magnetic. He commands scenes. He knows exactly how to push people's buttons, including ours. The same is true for someone like Doflamingo. He's not the strongest villain, or even the most effective, but he's stylish, charismatic, and unpredictable. He's fun to watch. Charisma matters. Villains usually get the most dramatic entrances, the best lines, the most expressive animation, the best theme music. When the villain shows up, the energy spikes. They bring flair, confidence, swagger. Things protagonists often can't express because they're busy being responsible. Villains are larger than life itself. We're not just drawn to what they do, we're drawn to how they do it. You know a villain is effective when the audience goes something like, okay, but he's not that wrong. Writers know that a good antagonist believes they're the hero of the story, but the great ones almost convince the audience of that too. Think of Kanki. His methods are extreme, but his criticism of the system? Valid. Or Garo, whose ideology is built on his real trauma and fear. He's a villain because he lost faith in humanity, not because he likes being evil. These villains resonate because they don't just challenge the hero, they challenge the worldview of the story. They force the audiences to confront uncomfortable truths. When a villain makes us question our own morality, that's when they become unforgettable. Let's not pretend looks don't matter. Villains often get the best character design, sleek coats, monstrous silhouette, glowing red eyes, tragic angelic beauty. All tools meant to make them instantly iconic. Sephiroth is one of the most recognizable antagonists in gaming, not just because he's powerful, but because he's elegant, composed, and visually striking. His design screams, "I am inevitable." Or consider Griffith from Berserk. He looked like an ethereal prince, designed intentionally contradictory to the monstrous choice he eventually made. And in more recent gaming, characters like Lady Dimitrescu exploded in popularity because they blend menace with undeniable aesthetic appeal. A great villain is a visual statement. There's another layer, deeper and more philosophical. Some villains feel memorable not because they're evil, tragic, or charismatic, but because they reveal the truth about the world. Take Makishima from Psychopath. He's not just an antagonist, he's a thesis statement. Through him, we understand the flaws of the system more clearly than through any hero. Or GLaDOS in Portal. She exposes the absurdity and cruelty of the setting through with passive-aggressive humor and escalating craft. Even Monokuma in Danganronpa is less a villain and more a representation of the world's chaos, fracture, and despair. These villains are compelling because they feel necessary. They're not obstacles, they're reflection. The villain is sometimes the mirror the story holds up to itself. Of course, nothing gets far more attached than a villain who becomes an ally. Characters like Zuko, one of the best redemption arcs in fiction, Vegeta, who turned pride and rivalry into lovable stubborn heroism, and Sasuke, he tries, okay? They tap into something extremely human, the desire to believe people can change. Redemption arcs are powerful because they take all the emotional investment we've built from hating, loving, fearing, or respecting a villain, and then they flip the script. A villain turning up validates our sympathy. It was our understanding of them wasn't misplaced. And let's be honest, we love a good enemies to friend arc, or enemies to lover arc, or enemies to free enemies who team up only during crossover movies arc. Your choice. There's one last uncomfortable truth. Villains let us explore desires we can't admit to. Power, control, revenge, freedom, chaos. The ability to ignore rules we feel trapped by. Light Yagami is compelling not because we agree with him, but because parts of us understand the temptation of absolute judgment. Lelouch resonates because it's the fantasy of one person taking on a corrupt empire, but without the purity of a classic hero. The Joker, in many incarnations, represents the fantasy of rejecting societal expectation altogether. These characters let us examine the darker corners of human nature safely, from a distance. Villains are the what-if version of us, exaggerated, dramatized, and cautionary. We don't want to be them, but they let us explore sides of ourselves we usually keep hidden. So why do we love villains? Because villains aren't just evil, they're powerful, they're tragic, they're charismatic, they challenge our worldview, they reflect the world's flaws, they embody what we fear and what we desire. They show us what happens when potential goes wrong, and sometimes they show that even the darkest path can turn back toward the light. Villains are everything we can be, shouldn't be, or hope never to become, wrapped in a character we can't stop watching. They hold up a mirror, not just to the hero, but to us. Thanks for watching, And let me know in the comments who's your favorite villain and why. If you want a part 2 or a deep dive in a specific villain, tell me which one. I'm always down to analyze more evil. See you in the next one.